consensus with a pattern, right? If everyone's looking at the same general pattern, you can understand where it might move from there. Whereas if you get broken down into these very small details right away, you're going to have disagreements about what is this and how does that go there and all these different things. And personally, I feel like that's how to lead leaders in energy and environmental design. So an architectural benchmarking system where they rate different buildings on their performance in energy and environment. But right now, how that system works is it's a bunch of different little checklists. And you need to get 5 points in this area, 10 over here, and it's just all these little details in these different boxes. You have these architects, and they look at this, and they're like, how am I supposed to make a building like this? So these older architects who don't have necessarily the latest downloads or the perspective of working from these patterns, they see all this stuff, and it's very difficult for them to incorporate all these things. I worked as a green engineer, so I was working with architects, and they just didn't. It just wasn't a part of, they just saw all these details and they were overwhelmed, and they just couldn't make this change to this different way of thinking. I think of culture change in the same way. We need to have a pattern that we work from. Once we have a general pattern, which includes general inspiration, places to look for, as well as something forward to move into, it makes it easier for us to collaborate together, to make something, to create these new cultures that are still emerging beneath us, literally, as our children and our grandchildren will eventually come up under us and overtake us.
Uncle Father.
So I studied permaculture, which is this idea of kind of ecological design and living that incorporates ecology into everyday human tasks. So everything you do just by the fact of being human is a positive effect on your local environment. And how I came to this idea of cultural succession was through struggling with being able to get to this perfect level over here. When I wasn't existing in Philadelphia in that perfect Eden already. So I had to transition into it. And there needed to be some kind of transition culture. And in order for me to stay here and live this dream, I realized that I couldn't do it physically. It wasn't going to be me that was going to live in this dream. It would take 50 years for these trees to grow. So it wasn't going to be me that was going to grow up in this dream unless I went down to Brazil or other places where they've been doing this for a long time. That was the only place I was going to get to live in this final era of this culture that I saw. And I was frustrated too because in the permaculture scene, I was giving a talk up in the Northeastern Permaculture Convergence. It's a gathering of permaculture enthusiasts and people that are new. And it's really fun kind of camp out weekend. There's little workshops and talks and stuff. But it wasn't really geared towards people creating benchmarks. Okay, in this many years, what are we going to try to accomplish as a group? And how can we move forward using the existing frameworks? But everybody was looking over here and just kind of pretending that we didn't have all this infrastructure and that all of this way of living going on, pretty seriously affecting the planet. So it was actually in the car ride back from that place, talking with some other permaculturists, and this guy Julius Pitti, who's an incredible permaculturist from Zimbabwe, who I actually ended up going on tour with for the next week and a half. But that's another story. So I was talking with Ryan Harb, a friend of mine. He teaches permaculture at UMass Amherst, or did. Now I think he's running some other operations. But so we were talking about what does this transition look like, and what is this? How do we talk about this stuff without it being either overwhelming? Because I felt totally overwhelmed living in this Rust Belt industrial civilization, post-industrial, but not yet something else. How do I look at that and work in that, but yet still dream of this like intact, mature, old-growth forest ecosystem, like old-growth seed forest or something. How do I look at that and still work here in this place without getting downtrodden and without just being like, burn it, knock it down, I'm going to go live in the tropics where I can grow like a 60-foot tree in like 10 years and be like living the dream. So that's kind of, in this conversation with Ryan where we were trying to figure out what that was, that's where cultural succession came out of. And it's a very simple idea. The model comes, I like natural models, because when you talk about human culture, when you're talking about natural models, you're learning the natural model while you're also talking about a bunch of other nonsense. So even if the cultural stuff doesn't make sense to you, or you disagree with it, you're still learning this natural pattern of growth, which is an important layer. Like I like the layers of it. Anyway, so the idea is in forest succession. So when you have a mature old-growth forest, and there's a clear cut, there's a fire, there's a mudslide, or something that knocks it down, and it's bare soil. The first things that grow up are like weeds and grasses, and they're important. They're the only kind of plants that really can sprout on this bare ground with nothing there. And so they sprout, they create a little bit of cover. Then you got shrubs that come up, and those are going to be a human parallel to this in a second. But the shrubs come up, and then they provide a little bit more cover, a little bit more shade, a little bit more wind protection, and creates a little bit more moisture down there. So then you have a young forest. You have a bunch of small little trees, lots of variety that comes up, and that's a young forest ecosystem. And after that, there's a mature forest that will grow up underneath of it, and it will mature and become something more solid. And actually, a lot of the species in that young forest ecosystem, they don't make it to the final era. But they contribute something very important that like builds up the soil, or it might take care of like toxins or something and convert it and help be a part of that process. Alright, so now let's look at that in a cultural frame. Let's put human culture through the history of time on that same natural progression. And the reason why I like that too is because it's easy to look at where we're at and be like, we're polluting the hell out of the world. What idiots. Like, I hate the world. I hate humans. We're stupid. And it's like, yes, we're doing that at the moment, but we needed to do that to get to this phase where we're at now, which will sprout something. And like, this is shading us and providing us some cover that we will grow up through and become something greater than it. And the ones after us will do that, even more so with us.